Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. Susan Sutherland here, and I'm here with Juliet Clothier and a very special guest, Elizabeth Husserl, who we will introduce in just a moment. Juliet, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. As you know, I started my new job yesterday, and I'm drinking out of a fire hose for sure. I'm working in a private school, which I've never been in a school environment before. So that's pretty exciting. It's great to be around young minds. It's a high school, and there's lots of work to do. So it was a fascinating day of learning and also writing down notes of things that I'm ready to take on. I'm ready to get going on. And I have a few weeks with the outgoing CFO. So that's a gift. It's really nice, but it's also, I get a little bit anxious. Like, I'm ready. You know, give me the wheel. So I have to balance things, and I have to, remind myself to trust the process and calm down a little bit and just enjoy the ride.
Wow. Exciting new chapter for you. I'm excited for you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I was going to say I'm about to embark on my semi-annual migration to the Northern Hemisphere. Whenever I say that, and obviously I say it twice a year at least, I'm reminded of Amur falcons. They are falcons that start every spring in Siberia and fly all the way to South Africa. They come down here, they hang out on telephone wires. They're beautiful creatures. They breed, and then they fly home to Siberia in the fall. And it's like such an amazing thing to think about an animal that does that kind of migration. And then I realize, okay, maybe I'm not a falcon, but twice a year I do this migration from one continent to another. And life is rich and beautiful in both places. And together it's kind of blows my mind. So, and as Juliet knows, this is the time of year where I'm just a little bit crazy because there's so much to do to get ready to go. And also to close up the house and get ready to move back to the Northern Hemisphere. But I'm getting excited, and I'll see you very soon.
I'm excited about that.
All right. I think it's time that we brought Elizabeth into our conversation. As I mentioned previously, Elizabeth Husserl is our guest today. She is a financial advisor, wealth planner. She founded her own company. She's an author, a speaker. Her revelatory book, The Power of Enough, Finding Joy in Your Relationship with Money, is a layered, nuanced guide to understanding how our individual relationship with the story of money and wealth are reflections of who we are and what we believe. And they include some of those powerful limiting beliefs that we are often unconscious of. At the risk of giving the power of the book short shrift, which I enjoyed very much reading, what I loved about the book is that it comes at money recognizing that the power that society gives money, capitalist society, imbues it with this power that the average person doesn't necessarily connect with. So the work that the book reveals is that how we think and feel about enough and satiety and the richness of our lives writ large, including money, is really what wealth is all about. She invites us to a rigorous intellectual review while also delving into a deeply emotional and psychological journey around what matters most to us as individuals and in relationship. The book is also solidly practical, complete with mini and sequential steps to navigate this complex terrain. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that our listeners will be very excited to hear more about you, your work, and this book.
Thank you, Susan, for having me. I have to say that has been the best introduction I've gotten thus far in my book tour. So thank you for putting just so much thought into that.
I would like, Elizabeth, if you would be willing, is to share with us an overview of your journey.
Yeah.
How did you come to co-found a wealth management company and end up writing this amazing book?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And I would start by answering that question by saying that I think I'm a lifelong student and a lifelong learner, and I've always been in inquiry with those things that really captivate me. So on one hand, I love numbers and math and finance, and there's something really satisfying. I'm sure you can relate to this, Juliet, of like a good spreadsheet, right? And we're like, oh, I can like fit things in and they tell a story. And equally important, I was raised, my mom's a therapist, and both my parents are deeply spiritual. And so always raised also on the importance of understanding the human psyche, our human spirituality, and just who are we as people, right? And really emphasizing those elements of kindness and transformation and growth. So these were my two worlds growing up, right? Like one foot in one world, the practical mind, and one foot in the deep inquiry mind. And I remember in college being like, Dad, I want to be paid to like ask deep questions, right? And figure them out in spreadsheets. And he's like, well, good luck on that, right? Like, how are you going to do these together? And so my journey took me to study economics and finance in my undergraduate. And then once I graduated, I ended up in Oaxaca, which is how I opened the book, telling the story of being in Oaxaca, working for a nonprofit there, doing community economics works with women, teaching them savings and loan cooperatives, and really coming back with my tail between my legs to be like, oh, wow, these women in Oaxaca really gained something in what I could teach them from a tactical, tangible tool on a savings and loan cooperatives, but they know something that was not taught to me in college, which is how do we experience wealth differently, right? And I pause when I say that, because if I remember what was taught to me, economics is the allocation of scarce resources, right? It's almost like we're taught scarcity from the get-go with finance economics. And I was like, their experience of wealth is very different, right? There was material poverty, but wealth when it came to community and spirituality and a belonging, all of these things that in the States, I started to feel were lacking. And so I came back in my mid-20s with that question, why is it that we have so much and yet we feel poor? And I've been just digging into that question for the last 2 decades. I went deep into financial planning and economics. I started at a different firm, and it was hard. I mean, finance is a very male-dominated industry. And I felt like I was working often in a locker room with a lot of testosterone, and you did things a certain way. And I was like, what is this? And I would get back in my car and come home and ask my husband, did I make the right choice? And I just stuck with it because I felt, to your question, that I had something to offer in my industry from a different angle, perspective, and voice, right? We could call it a potentially more feminine angle, but I would say it's more of a humanistic angle. Like, how do we situate our relationship with money in a much bigger context of our experience of wealth? So 5 years ago, 4 of us actually left the old firm because it was like an old ship heading in one direction. And we wanted something a little more modern, a little more lighter. And so I co-founded Peak 360, knowing that with my partners, we each committed to being a thought leader. And we're thought leaders in different ways, but that we were committed to helping each other carve that space where we could bring that thought leadership to the world. And so, if anything, my 3 partners from the get-go have supported me in writing this book. I would put my out of office on Fridays. All my clients know I don't take meetings on Fridays. And that is how I wrote the book, was just like carving out that space to be like, okay, what am I taking away from my own research, my own studies, my conversations with clients? I work with a lot of clients in C-suites. Like, there's a deeper conversation. It's not just around financial planning and performance and risk mitigation. It's about how do we experience and all the wealth that we are accumulating, not just for accumulation's sake, but for enhancing our well-being and connecting wealth to that state of well-being.
As you're talking, Elizabeth, I'm so struck by the scarcity model versus the abundance mindset, which, what really is jumping out for me right now is sort of also left brain, right brain. That when you think about the world of finance, people tend to think numbers. They tend to think of a guy in a suit.
Right.
But when you begin to ask the same questions through your right brain rather than your left brain, that's the right one, right? The correct one?
I think so.
And think about it from an abundance perspective. I know I get those confused.
Me too.
That rather than asking just the questions in terms of linear and bottom line and scarcity, looking at them through the filter of abundance and creativity and even spirituality is just a real shift in how, especially in a capitalist society, we tend to think of those subjects.
Well, even
so good for you.
Yeah, I think you were describing it. I mean, I think what people think is like the stock tickers, right? Like people, the guys stupid looking at the stock tickers. I think what's really interesting, it's not just left brain, right brain, but it's also mind, heart, and body. And I think that's a really important distinction that I talk about in the book, Susan and Juliet, is that, because what happens is that we think the way out of scarcity is through an abundance mindset. But notice we're still in the mind center. And the mind center, its best use, right? And we know this as a CFO, is to analyze, forecast, mitigate risk, look at the whole horizon, scan, right? But our scarcity brain, because our brains are wired for scarcity. That is how the three of us are having this conversation. Our ancestors figured out how to be alive and we were born and we're here, right? So scarcity brain has a role for survival. But we need to bring in the wisdom of the heart and the body to change or to transform survival into thriving, right? And what's really important is that embodied wealth is a visceral state, right? It's how our body can start to give us really meaningful cues on what strategies am I employing with my resources to feel satisfied with my use of resources. Very different than just accumulating resources on a piece of paper that allows us to feel, we continue to experience money as abstract because that piece of paper might be positive, it might be growing, but doesn't necessarily bring any enhanced sense of wealth and experience and satisfaction and satiation. So that's a key piece of it, is bringing that visceral experience of wealth to the equation.
I think that's really interesting because with my coaching clients, a lot of people that I'm talking to these days are in their heads.
Yep.
They're all in their heads. And I keep and this is work that I'm still doing for myself. It is not easy work to get myself out of my head. What is my body telling me? And I think that satiety comes from the body. Your mind will never get there or rarely get there. It's really how are you feeling in your body and how are you connecting to the broader world? And that is through, I think, that body and the spirit. And I love that piece of it. I think too, you talk about kind of how we got here, right? And this is, generations. There's a lot of people who grew up with parents who were in the Depression and, there's never going to be enough, right? We're just always behind. I know my parents saved things that are just ridiculous and they didn't grow up in the Depression, but there's just they just bring this mindset. And I think about that financial DNA part of book. And I just want to throw in there too, is the money and shame piece of that. I was a young single mom. I didn't have money. I was living barely paycheck to paycheck. My credit sucked. I bounced checks. I was scraping by. And even now that I have more money, and definitely have, a full life and I have a lot of joy in my life, I still end up, when a credit check is being done, even though my credit's great, I still have that fear and that feeling. And I just wonder if you can address that because it's part of what you were talking about with your DNA.
Well, 100%. And I think it's kind of the other side of the question of how I got here, right? Was my grandfather, Walter, he was an Austrian Jew who had to leave Austria during the Second World War, right? And ended up in South America, in Colombia. That's why I look like I do, because my dad married a Colombian and she's got strong genes. But why I bring that up is because scarcity, and we know this in families that have suffered persecution, or to your point, the Depression, right? When there's moments of extreme scarcity and lack and fear and persecution, we internalize that in our visceral body system, right? And so financial DNA is referring to like the study of epigenetics, when our genes are more susceptible to reacting to certain situations in a certain way, because that is what was literally coded in our familiar structure, right? And so I'll never forget growing up in my house, and like my dad was a working professional. Both my parents were working professionals, but there was still this experience of scarcity. It was really confusing. I'm like, wait a second, they're paying for my school. My needs are met. Why do we still feel scarcity? And now looking back, I was like, wait, where was that software update button, right? That we could push on our phone to be like version, 10.0. And to some extent, that would be easy because that is really, and I say that in jest, but I also say that kind of with a depth perspective of we are responsible for creating that software update if your current financial reality isn't the same as the previous one. And I love, Juliet, that you were talking kind of like your parenting experience. Like, I'll never forget how much my daughter would scream her head off every time I would put her in the car as a baby. And even after she stopped doing that, I would still get into the car and clench. My body was waiting for the cries to happen. So that's a really good example of like, if you come from a time in your life that you're living paycheck to paycheck, or if your family comes from a time of their life of deep scarcity, deep poverty, financial poverty, your body's first reaction might be to tense up anytime there is a moment of financial stress or decision, even if your reality is different. And again, that is why the importance of working with your body, right? To pause and to say, okay, where are those emotions of shame, of fear, of doubt, of insecurity? Where are they located in my body, right? How can I bring some gentle kindness and awareness to that? How can I surround it with a different energy of where I'm at today? Calling in different resources, right? You're like, hey, money, this may not be your terrain, but hold off I'll come to that decision I need to make. Let me call in some compassion, some kindness, some community support, right? And let me work with that part that has not caught up to my current reality, right? And that is how we start to allow our bodies to experience a different type of wealth. We talk about compounding interest in our portfolios. And when we start to really experience compounding meaning, we build a different experience of portfolio from the inside out that then matches what we're building externally.
I love that. That's so powerful. And, again, kind of going back to some of the coaching stuff I'm doing, I'm realizing just the ties here, because I often, when someone is frenetic and explaining what's going on at work, and I'm coaching them, and, they're talking for 15 minutes about this person at work that's just a jerk and blah, blah, blah. And I just say, can we take a moment and just soften the edges of that? Yeah. And that's what you're saying about just all the inherent things that are in there and identifying them and giving them a hug, basically, or love, and just saying, that you don't have to feel this way anymore, and doing that healing. And it's so interesting because, in therapy, you learn about your inner child and all those things. And now I'm seeing this total relationship to your relationship with money, but also kind of the overall wealth that you're talking about. Susan.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I'm trying to picture you working with your clients. Are you more of a coach around walking them through, for example, some of the exercises that you write about in your book, which are very hands-on, but also it's some deep psychological work and emotional work to be done? How do you work with a client? Are they surprised when they have to get embodied and talk about that with you, or do they come to you because they know that that's your approach?
Yes. Yeah, I would say
very long-winded question.
No, I get it, Susan, but it's a really important one. So at this point, I screen all my clients. So I have an initial pre-screening call to make sure, and one of the questions in my pre-screening is, are you interested in connecting wealth with meaning? Right. And so that they know that is part of what we're going to be doing. If they tell me flat out no, I'm like, awesome, no judgment. I have amazing other advisors for you. That is what I want to bring. And to this extent, I'm a referral only because I actually feel like there's so many people who want this. Right. And so to answer your specific question, how do I work with clients? So with financial advisors, we have these quarterly meetings, Q1, Q2, Q3. So Q1 meetings, and I've been doing this recently is I start always with my wealth mandala. And so before we meet, I have all my clients complete the wealth mandala exercise, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I really start to understand what are the different needs that we want to focus on this year in terms of channeling resources, right? Because as I create the financial plan and the investment strategies, again, I'm not doing this in a vacuum. I'm doing this in a very unique and personalized way to making sure that the resources are supporting what we're designing for that client, right? When you were talking about your migration, Susan, you've designed that life. And you have to channel resources to be able to do that, to support the two homes. And, and so it's that same connection of like, okay, I can listen and hear that because I'm trained to listen and hear that. So I'll do wealth mandala and cash flow in the first meeting. I'll do, kind of like financial projection and forecasting in the second meeting. Now, it's some unique times. We're kind of rebalancing as we're going to, just because it's just the world that we're in right now.
Yes.
But to some extent, I tell people that, we don't review statements together because we can do that offline. Like when I'm with them, it's truly a deep conversation of what matters most to them and then what adjustments in their plans need to happen to support that. And, all my clients know that that's how I approach money management and wealth management. And I think just really resonate with it. I'll also send them chapters of my book to be like, I need you to sit down and have a conversation with money right now, right? Or I'll send them a little voice memo. I'm like, this is what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking of you. And so, now that I have the book, I can refer to chapter 4, chapter 7, which is really helpful. And that is part of why I made it so practical, is that I want people to be doing these exercises outside of our meetings.
Yep. I just really am so captured by how different the work you do is to the average financial planner. I mean, it's just a world apart.
Yeah.
So you talk about the wealth mandala. Can you describe that for our listeners? We will have in the show notes a link to your book and to your resources on her website. There's a lot of good things, but could you just talk us through that a tiny bit?
Yes. So I'm going to say two things before I jump into what the wealth mandala is that one, kind of a core premise of the book is that money and wealth are different. That's really important that kind of your listeners start to kind of chew on. People are like, what do you mean by that? Money is a tool and a technology, right? It's a tool for exchange. It's a technology of trust. We can talk more about that. Wealth is a state of well-being. And so once we start to work from that premise, right, one of the things that I connect wealth to is the science of human needs, right? I'm really stressing the point. Let's throw out the window this idea of like, am I needy? Am I not? No, we all have human needs. That's part of being human, right? And so let's put all those needs on an even playing field. And so what I did with the wealth mandala means circle in Sanskrit, and it's a tool that's used to go from suffering to joy. So I took that same shape of a mandala circle. I took the 12 human needs that I gathered from research from Maslow, from other economists, and I flattened the playing field and I say, all of these are equally important. One of those needs is financial stability, right? Which is kind of where the realm of money typically goes in. But there's other needs like safety and physical health and freedom and purpose and leisure and touch and connection and belonging, right? I leave a little space open for you to put two needs that I didn't name, right? Some people put creativity or service or transcendence. And what I ask people to do with this very simple map is to, on a scale of 1 to 10, color in each little piece of the pie, right? So financial stability would get a little slice of the pie, color on a scale of 1 to 10, how fulfilled and satisfied are you in your life right now with that particular need, right? So if you're feeling a 1, you color a little bit. If you're feeling a 10, you color all the way to the edge. And you do that with all of the needs that I have. And then you take a step back. And I always tell people is to appreciate the first impression as if you were just looking at a flower. And a flower has imperfect flower petals, and we still think flower is beautiful, right? And so the end goal isn't perfection. The end goal isn't having all of them filled out, because then kind of like, no, like that only happens probably when we have a static life and we're dying, right? Like we're done. So it's going to be always in flux. But what it does is that it helps us understand, okay, where am I actually feeling lack and poverty? It might not be in the financial stability, but we get so obsessed with financial stability, right? Maybe I'm feeling lack and poverty in my slice of the pie for touch or purpose or physical health. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a client meeting and they're like, I'm feeling less wealthy right now. And when I ask them, they're like, yeah, I'm going through a medical crisis. And I had planned out this retirement full of travel and I can't go fly fishing. And I can't do this because my body won't support me in it. That is poverty, right? You're not able to use the resources you've worked so hard to then enjoy. And so when we start to have that conversation, Juliet and Susan, around where are the areas that I truly am feeling lack, now we get a lot more crystal clear on what I need to design when it comes to strategies. And I tell people it's really important. Let's just say someone's like, okay, my need for touch is a 2 because you know what? I got some like unprocessed grief. And so I just cringe when someone goes in for a hug and I don't know how to get through that, right? And so we talk about what monetary strategies can you bring to that? You know, is it time to potentially work with a mental health professional? Do you need to go to a grief workshop, whatever it is? And also what non-monetary strategy, right? Can you ask your spouse for a hug and just like really take it in? Can you ask your kid for a hug, right? Like, and what's important is that the more we're also clear on the non-monetary strategies, we break our dependency on money for satisfying all of our needs and being that resource that we hoard, right? What becomes interesting is that people start to get really creative on how they can satisfy their needs. And I tell people you can become wealthier without adding $1 to your bank account by getting clear on what are the different strategies you're using to satisfy your needs.
Wow. It's I feel like every time you finish a sentence, Elizabeth, I'm here saying, wow.
Me too. Me too. Definitely.
2 questions that I want to ask. One is a theme that goes through your work and through your book, which really resonates with me, is about defining success.
Yeah.
That each person has to be really intentional about what they want to have in their life, where they're willing to devote their time and energy, and of course, money. But it's a bigger picture. And I work with C-suite executives mostly. And that's one of the questions that I work with them on, which is, you're at the top of your game. Why are you not feeling amazing? And usually it's because they haven't taken the time to look at the wheel of life or the wheel of wealth and decide what's really important to them. So my question coming out of that, very long-winded, is what is your advice to leaders and people in the C-suite, given how you work? And I know you probably work with a lot of C-suite executives.
100%. Yeah. Which, to some extent could be like, a lot of my clients are like, they're financially independent in the sense that they don't need to keep working, but they do, for a slew of reasons that we could get into. But I think what's really important, and so I'll say 2 things. I've actually used the wealth mandala as a tool to answer that question, Susan, because you can either go through all the different needs and say, hey, what would wealth look and feel like in your slice of the pie of safety, physical health, freedom? And so you can go through the different aspects of the needs and get super clear on what each one of them would look like from success metrics, right? And then especially on the ones that potentially they're lower in, a lot of times what ends up happening with my C-suite executives, they're so busy with work, right, that it comes at the expense of some of these other areas that actually have a real impact on their ability to experience their wealth. Right. And so they end up accumulating a ton, but it comes at the expense of being able to enjoy it. Oftentimes relationships, being able to attend things for their kids, right? Being able to actually attend a meeting, right? Sometimes is hard. And so I think that's a really important piece, is that if they draw a blank, then say, okay, we're going to go through these different areas and just what would success look like in these areas? And you start to really get clear on what the bigger picture is and what are the themes. And then you can say, okay, let's focus on what. I think for myself, and it comes back to your question around financial DNA, Juliet, is that for me, one of my biggest areas of lack growing up was belonging, right? Which is so kind of interesting to say, and partly because my grandfather had left his homeland of Austria and ended up in South America. My mother left her homeland of Colombia, South America, and ended up in the States. So there's been a theme of lack of belonging in my family that I inherited. And my mom so desperately wanted to be back in Colombia. It came at the expense of teaching me how to feel like I belonged in the States, in the South, in New Orleans, right? And so, we've had some really good conversations after my book where she's like, oh, I can see how that really impacted you. So for me, my metrics of success was building a community where I feel like I belong and building a home where I have household ease. Very particular to my story, right? And so sometimes too, if people draw a blank, have them write out their money story, have them write out their ancestral money story, the financial DNA, and you can start to see what are some kind of gaping holes in the family lineage that if that got healed would also contribute to success.
I'm just blown away by all of this and your articulation of where lacking can happen even when someone has so much wealth. And I think we're seeing that in the larger world right now where people just there's never enough. There's never enough money. There's never enough money. And that's driving so much of what's happening in the world. And even the stock market, like you were talking about the ticker, I'm looking at it. I'm checking it quite often, more than I have before, partially because it's interesting to me and I don't have a lot of fear around it because I've seen it ebb and flow for many years, but it's also an energy suck, right? It's just sucking your energy. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't change it. I can only change what I'm doing. So I find that just the psychology of this that you're bringing to the idea of money and wealth is so important right now. And I'm working in an environment with young people, with teenagers. I can see this as a class, that they could start learning because this is a private school. Yeah. Most of the people going there will have inherited wealth. Yeah. And what does that mean for them? And I'm just, all my wheels are turning. I want to ask one last question, which is for the C-suite. What's a secret? What's the secret? You've got C-suite executives, you're saying, who just aren't getting what they need for some reason. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are there.
So I think the biggest takeaway for your listeners is, again, I said it before, but I'm going to go into deeper, is that money and wealth are different things. And this is really important because all of my C-suite clients at some point or another feel shame because they feel lack in their life in a way that's not financial. And they're like, what the hell? Like, I have all this privilege. Who am I to feel lack in these other areas? And I think it's really important for my C-suite clients to get the normalization that poverty does not just pertain to the world of money. Poverty is in other areas of our life. And if we get super clear and find the language and tools to work with that, we can really make some deep strides in helping, our wealthiest clients at some point feel wealth in a different way. And I think that's really important, right? Because there's that catch-22. Damn if I have money, damn if I don't. It's like we don't talk enough about it because of these social taboos. And so I would say the secret is to see wealth as a state of well-being, to give yourself permission to really own those areas of lack in your life, and to really see your relationship to money as a mirror for self-growth and transformation. And the last secret I'll say is that no investment advisor, financial advisor, CPA, alternative hedge fund manager, no one should stand between you and your relationship to money, right? You need to have a direct relationship to money. You need to sit down and know what that relationship is about. And then you can have experts come in and help give some guidance. But you have a direct relationship to money and it's yours to own and design.
Yeah. Very well said. And I think I could probably keep talking with you and Elizabeth and Juliet for another hour or so.
Absolutely.
Just in the different chapters in the book. But we promise to have you back off the podcast in a few minutes. And so I want to thank you, Elizabeth, so much for coming on and chatting with me and Juliet and sharing so much about your philosophy, your work, and this amazing book that you've written. We will have in our show notes for the podcast the name of the book, the resource link so that people can get it. So thank you so much for being with us. Juliet, anything you want to add before we segue out?
No, my mind is completely blown and open at the same time. I'm very excited about this, and I am excited to just start having these conversations with my friends and my community to, see where they're at with it and what they're thinking about, because I think this is so important. And I thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet. Thank you, Susan, for having me. And I love that last piece, Juliet, because on my website, there's also a book discussion guide, because I think the more we start talking about this, the more interesting and creative, and money becomes a catalyst for the change we're looking for. So, may everyone listening take that as an invitation. Talk more about your relationship to money with people. You will feel lighter.
I'm feeling a book club coming on. That's all I can say.
Yay!
Thank you, Elizabeth, for being with us. Juliet, as always, great to see you. And this is the end of another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We hope you will subscribe and listen. And always, we're very grateful to our listeners for joining us. We'll have another episode out in a couple of weeks. We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier, and the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.